At 0700 on October 4, 1943, Colonel Hubert Zemke stood on the hard stand at RAF Halesworth, watching mechanics fuel 52 Republic P-47 Thunderbolts for a bomber escort mission deep into Germany. 29 years old, 6 months of combat, 4 confirmed kills. The Luftwaffe had sent 180 Focke-Wulf 190s and Messerschmitt 109s to defend the industrial targets his bombers would hit that morning. Every pilot climbing into those cockpits knew the numbers. The P-47 Thunderbolt weighed 7 tons empty. The German Focke-Wulf 190 weighed less than 4. In a turning fight, physics won. The lighter fighter turned tighter. The heavier fighter died. Zemke's 56th Fighter Group had lost 11 aircraft in their first 4 months of combat. 4 pilots killed, 7 captured. The Germans called the Thunderbolt the Jug, short for Juggernaut, a flying tank that couldn't dogfight. American bomber crews watched P-47s try to protect them and saw the truth. When Focke-Wulfs attacked, the Thunderbolts couldn't stay with them through the turns. Luftwaffe pilots broke away from bomber formations, knowing the heavy American fighters wouldn't follow through the vertical maneuvers. They were right. On June 26, 1943, Zemke's group engaged Jagdgeschwader 26 over France. Veteran German pilots flew circles around the P-47s. Literally. 5 Thunderbolts went down. 4 American pilots died. Captain Robert Johnson barely made it home with his aircraft shot to pieces. His Thunderbolt had taken over 200 cannon hits and still flew, but it hadn't won the fight. The mathematics were simple. A Focke-Wulf 190 could turn inside a P-47 every single time. At 15,000 feet, the German fighter completed a 360-degree turn in 22 seconds. The Thunderbolt needed 28, 6 seconds. In combat, 6 seconds meant death. 8th Air Force generals watched their fighter group struggle and made plans to replace the P-47 with the new P-51 Mustang. Lighter, faster in level flight, better range. The Thunderbolt program looked like a failed experiment. 5 other fighter groups were scheduled to transition to Mustangs by the end of 1943. But Zemke had spent 2 years testing the P-47 before the war. He knew something the Germans didn't. The Thunderbolt couldn't turn. It could dive. The massive Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp engine generated 2,000 horsepower. The thick wing and heavy airframe stayed stable at speeds that would tear apart a Focke-Wulf. In a vertical dive, nothing in the Luftwaffe could catch a Thunderbolt. Zemke stopped trying to fight the war the Germans expected. He developed new tactics built around the P-47's actual strengths: height advantage, diving attacks, hit and run, never turn with the enemy, dive through the formation, use speed and momentum, zoom back to altitude, attack again. The 56th Fighter Group practiced these tactics through the summer of 1943. Dive bombing runs on ground targets, high-speed gunnery passes, energy management. Every pilot learned to think in 3 dimensions. Use altitude like currency, trade height for speed, trade speed for position. Never get slow, never try to turn. By September, Zemke's pilots were ready. But 8th Air Force bomber losses were accelerating. On September 17th, missions to French targets cost 8 B-17s. German fighters hit the formations before American escorts arrived. The bombing campaign was failing. October 4th would be different. Zemke planned to put his new tactics into full combat test. 52 P-47s, all diving from altitude, all using speed instead of turning, all trusting the mathematics he had calculated. If you want to see how Zemke's diving tactics worked against the Luftwaffe, please hit that like button. It helps us share more stories like this one. Subscribe if you haven't already. Back to Zemke. The mission brief that morning included one detail that changed everything. The bomber stream would fly at 22,000 feet. Zemke positioned his Thunderbolts at 30,000, 8,000 feet above the bombers, 8,000 feet of potential energy ready to convert into diving speed. By noon, his 56th Fighter Group would either prove the P-47 could win or watch their bombers burn. German radar stations tracked the American formation, crossing the Dutch coast at 0930 hours. Luftwaffe controllers scrambled Jagdgeschwader 1 and Jagdgeschwader 26 to intercept. 73 Focke-Wulf 190s climbed toward the American bomber formation. German pilots expected what they always saw: American fighters flying tight formation alongside the B-17s, easy targets when forced to maneuver slowly to stay with the bombers. But Zemke's 56th Fighter Group wasn't escorting the bombers. They were hunting 8,000 feet above them. At 0952, Zemke spotted the German formation assembling 15 miles ahead of the bombers at 18,000 feet. The Focke-Wulfs were climbing into attack position. Standard Luftwaffe doctrine: gain altitude advantage, dive through the bomber formation, use speed to escape before the escorts react. Zemke rolled his P-47 into a 70-degree dive. 51 Thunderbolts followed, 7 tons of aircraft and ammunition accelerating toward terminal velocity. The massive propeller bit into the thin air. The double Wasp engine roared at full military power. Airspeed needles climbed past 300 miles per hour, past 350, past 400. The German fighters never looked up. They were focused on the bombers below them. They didn't see 52 P-47s screaming down at 450 miles per hour until Zemke's first burst of 50 caliber fire ripped through a Focke-Wulf's cockpit. The German pilot never pulled out of his climb. What happened next lasted 90 seconds. 51 more Thunderbolts dove through the German formation at speeds the Focke-Wulfs couldn't match. Each P-47 carried 8 Browning M2 machine guns. Each gun fired 800 rounds per minute. The combined firepower of the group put 68,000 rounds into the sky every 60 seconds. German pilots tried to brake, tried to turn, tried to dive away. But the physics were wrong. A Focke-Wulf at 400 miles per hour couldn't pull out of a dive as quickly as the heavier P-47. The Thunderbolt's thick wing and massive structure handled the G-forces better. German pilots blacked out trying to match the American turn rates. Or their aircraft came apart under the stress. Zemke's wingman, Lieutenant Walter Cook, watched a Focke-Wulf try to dive away from his attack. The German pilot pushed his stick forward. His fighter went vertical. Cook stayed with him. At 500 miles per hour, the Focke-Wulf's right wing folded backward and tore off. The wreckage tumbled toward the Dutch farmland below. The remaining Thunderbolts didn't dogfight. They didn't try to turn with the Germans. Each pilot made one high-speed pass, fired, dove through, then used their remaining speed to climb back to altitude for another attack. Zemke had calculated this exactly. The Thunderbolt's engine produced enough power to regain 8,000 feet in 4 minutes. 4 minutes. Then they could dive again. The German formation scattered. Focke-Wulf pilots who moments before were preparing to attack B-17s now fought for their own survival. They couldn't climb fast enough to escape the diving Thunderbolts. They couldn't dive fast enough to outrun them. They couldn't turn because the P-47s never committed to turning fights. By 10:03, 11 minutes after the first attack, the sky above the bomber stream was empty of German fighters. The Focke-Wulfs that survived fled east toward their airfields. Not one German fighter made it through to attack the B-17s. 0 bombers lost. Zemke's group reformed at altitude and continued the escort mission. The bombers hit their targets without interference. The return flight showed more Luftwaffe formations in the distance. None approached close enough to engage. The 56th Fighter Group landed at Halesworth between 1300 and 1400 hours. Ground crews counted ammunition expenditure. Gun cameras were pulled for film development. Intelligence officers began debriefing pilots. The initial reports seemed impossible. The group claimed 21 confirmed German fighters destroyed, another 8 probably destroyed, 16 damaged, 0 American aircraft lost, 0 pilots wounded. 8th Air Force Headquarters demanded verification. They sent investigators to interview every pilot separately. They analyzed all gun camera footage. They cross-referenced with radar tracks and radio intercepts. Every claim checked out. October 4th, 1943 was real. But that was one mission, one day. The Luftwaffe had hundreds of fighters. The strategic bombing campaign would continue for 18 more months. Could Zemke's tactics work consistently? Could other fighter groups learn them? Could the P-47 actually win the air war over Europe? 3 weeks later, the 56th Fighter Group would answer those questions in a way that terrified the Luftwaffe. October 1943 became the 56th Fighter Group's proving ground. 8th Air Force scheduled maximum effort bomber missions every day weather permitted. Bremen, Munster, Wilhelmshaven, Düren. industrial targets deep in Germany. Each mission drew massive Luftwaffe response. October 8th, escort to Bremen. The group intercepted 40 Messerschmitt 109s, forming up to attack the bomber stream. Same tactics: high-altitude position, diving attacks. 6 German fighters destroyed, 0 American losses. October 10th, Munster raid. 60 Focke-Wulfs attempted to break through to the bombers. Zemke's pilots hit them in 3 successive diving passes. 9 confirmed kills, 2 probables. The bombers completed their mission without losing a single aircraft to fighter attack. October 14th was different. 8th Air Force launched the 2nd Schweinfurt raid. 291 B-17s targeted ball-bearing factories critical to German war production. The Luftwaffe threw everything available into defending Schweinfurt. Over 300 fighters, every available Geschwader. This was the decisive battle both sides knew was coming. Zemke wasn't flying that day. He was at 8th Air Force headquarters receiving the British Distinguished Flying Cross. His deputy commander, Lieutenant Colonel David Schilling, led the 56th into combat. Schilling followed Zemke's tactics exactly. Position high. Wait for the German formations to commit. Dive through them at maximum speed. But the scale of the battle overwhelmed every escort group. Too many German fighters, not enough American escorts. The math didn't work. 68 B-17s went down. 680 American airmen killed or captured in one afternoon. The Schweinfurt raid became the worst single-day loss of the war for 8th Air Force. The 56th Fighter Group claimed 16 German fighters destroyed that day, more than any other escort group, but it wasn't enough. The bombers kept burning. The strategic bombing campaign looked finished. American losses were unsustainable. German fighter production was accelerating. The daylight bombing offensive was failing. October 20th, 4 days after Schweinfurt, 8th Air Force commanders debated suspending deep penetration raids until long-range P-51 Mustangs arrived in sufficient numbers. Some generals argued the P-47 had proven inadequate for bomber escort regardless of tactics. The aircraft was too short-ranged, too heavy, too limited. Then the weather cleared over northern Germany. 8th Air Force launched another maximum effort mission. Düren Railway Yards. The 56th Fighter Group took off from Hillsworth at 0830. Zemke was back in command. The mission followed the new doctrine exactly. The group positioned at 32,000 feet, 10,000 feet above the bomber stream. German fighters rose to meet the B-17s. Zemke counted 73 contacts. Jagdgeschwader 26 and elements of Jagdgeschwader 3, some of the Luftwaffe's most experienced pilots. The German formation leader was Major Wilhelm Ferdinand Galland, younger brother of Luftwaffe General Adolf Galland. 55 confirmed victories, 7 years of combat experience. He had fought in Spain, Poland, France, and Russia. He knew every fighter tactic the Luftwaffe taught. Galland positioned his Gruppe for a classic bounce attack on the bombers. His fighters held altitude advantage over the B-17s. His pilots were in perfect formation. They began their diving attack at 10:45. Zemke was already diving. His 52 Thunderbolts had 2,000 feet more altitude than the German formation. They hit Galland's Gruppe from above and behind at 470 miles per hour. The German pilots never saw them coming. The combat lasted 7 minutes. 17 German fighters went down in that window. Galland's Focke-Wulf took multiple 50 caliber hits in the engine and cockpit. His aircraft went into an uncontrolled spin at 23,000 feet. Major Wilhelm Ferdinand Galland did not survive. The Luftwaffe lost one of its most experienced fighter leaders in a battle that lasted less time than it takes to boil water. By October 31st, the 56th Fighter Group had flown 9 major combat missions in 1 month. Their confirmed kill total for October was 39 German aircraft destroyed. The group that couldn't dogfight had become the highest-scoring fighter group in 8th Air Force. The Germans noticed. Luftwaffe intelligence began tracking American fighter tactics and identified a new threat. They called it the Amerikanische Sturztaktik, the American diving tactic, and they had no counter for it. November 1943. Luftwaffe Jagdgeschwader commanders held emergency conferences across occupied Europe. The Americans had changed something fundamental. German fighter pilots reported P-47s attacking from impossible altitudes at speeds their aircraft couldn't match. Traditional intercept tactics weren't working. Luftwaffe doctrine had dominated European skies for 4 years. Gain altitude, position above the enemy, dive through with speed advantage. The tactic had destroyed Polish, French, British, and Russian aircraft by the thousands. Now the Americans were using it better. Major Gunther Rahl commanded Jagdgeschwader 11, 275 confirmed victories, one of Germany's most successful fighter pilots. He studied the 56th Fighter Group's tactics and identified the problem. The P-47 pilots weren't escorting bombers, they were hunting fighters. They ignored the B-17s and went after the Luftwaffe formations before they could attack. German fighter controllers tried adapting. They sent formations in at different altitudes, some high, some low, some from the flanks. The goal was to force the American escorts to split their forces, divide their attention, create openings for bomber attacks. It didn't work. Zemke positioned his squadrons in vertical layers, one squadron at 30,000 feet, second at 28,000, third at 26,000. When Germans came high, the top squadron dove. When Germans came low, the bottom squadron dove. The middle squadron covered both. Every P-47 maintained enough altitude advantage to accelerate into attack speed. November 5th, mission to Munster. Jagdgeschwader 1 attempted a coordinated attack with 30 Focke-Wulfs approaching the bombers from multiple directions simultaneously. Zemke's group intercepted all 3 formations before they reached firing range. 14 German fighters destroyed. The bombers lost 0 aircraft to fighter attack. Flak got 2 B-17s. Fighters got none. The Luftwaffe began avoiding areas where the 56th Fighter Group operated. German controllers listened to radio traffic and identified Zemke's call signs. When they heard his group in the area, they directed their fighters to different sectors. Better to miss an attack opportunity than lose experienced pilots. By late November, 8th Air Force Headquarters recognized what was happening. Other fighter groups flying P-47s weren't achieving the 56 results. The 4th Fighter Group, the 78th Fighter Group, the 352nd. All good units, all competent pilots, none matching Zemke's kill ratios. 8th Air Force Commander General Ira Eaker ordered Zemke to brief all P-47 groups on his tactics. December 8, 1943, Kings Cliff Airfield. Every fighter group commander in 8th Air Force attended. Zemke spent 4 hours explaining the mathematics. The P-47 couldn't turn. Accept that. Don't try to dogfight. Use altitude. Convert height to speed. Hit fast. Disengage fast. Climb back to altitude. Repeat. Never get slow. Never turn with the enemy. Think vertically, not horizontally. Some group commanders resisted. They had trained their pilots in traditional dogfighting, turning combat, close-in maneuvering. Zemke was telling them everything they knew was wrong for the Thunderbolt. The aircraft couldn't do what fighter doctrine required, so change the doctrine. Colonel Don Blakesley commanded the 4th Fighter Group. His unit was scheduled to transition to P-51 Mustangs in January 1944. He asked Zemke if the diving tactics would work for Mustangs too. Zemke said yes. Every fighter benefited from altitude advantage and high-speed attacks. But the P-47 needed those tactics. The Mustang had options. The Thunderbolt didn't. December 22nd, the 56th Fighter Group escorted bombers to Osnabrück. Heavy overcast, poor visibility. German fighters attacked from inside cloud layers. The ambush tactics eliminated American altitude advantage. 8 P-47s took damage, 1 pilot killed, 2 captured. The mission showed the limitations. When weather forced low-altitude operations, the Thunderbolt's advantages disappeared. But clear weather dominated Northern Europe through January and February 1944. Perfect conditions for high-altitude operations. The strategic bombing campaign accelerated. Big Week was coming. 6 consecutive days of maximum effort raids against German aircraft factories. Every available bomber, every available escort, the largest air battle in history. The 56th Fighter Group would fly all 6 days. Their mission assignments included a target no American fighter had ever reached, Berlin, the German capital. 500 miles into enemy territory, beyond the combat radius of every escort fighter in the inventory. except someone had figured out how to extend the P-47's range by 18%. And that someone was about to prove the Thunderbolt could protect bombers all the way to Hitler's doorstep. February 1944. Republic aviation engineers delivered modified external fuel tanks to RAF Halesworth. Each tank held 150 gallons. Standard P-47 internal fuel capacity was 305 gallons. The external tanks increased total fuel to 605 gallons. Combat radius jumped from 230 miles to 425 miles. Berlin was within range. The problem was weight. A fully fueled P-47 with external tanks weighed 9 tons at takeoff. The aircraft needed every foot of Halesworth's runway to get airborne. Once airborne, the fuel weight affected climb performance. German fighters could intercept during the vulnerable climb phase when American fighters were heavy and slow. Zemke calculated the solution. Take off with full fuel. Climb slowly to altitude over England. Burn off the external tank fuel first. Drop the empty external tanks before crossing into enemy territory. By the time German fighters appeared, the P-47s would be at combat weight with full internal fuel remaining. The mathematics worked, but the tactics required perfect timing. If the external tanks dropped too early, the fighters wouldn't reach Berlin. If they dropped too late, the aircraft would be too heavy for combat maneuvers. Zemke set the drop point over Holland, 200 miles from base. The fighters would cross the Dutch coast at combat weight with enough internal fuel for 2 hours of operations. February 20th. Big week began. 8th Air Force launched 941 bombers against German aircraft factories. The 56th Fighter Group took off at 0900 hours. 54 P-47s, each carrying full fuel and ammunition. Target, Leipzig, 400 miles into Germany. The group climbed to 30,000 feet over the North Sea. External tanks fed fuel to the engines during the climb. Over Holland, all 54 pilots toggled their drop releases simultaneously. 108 external fuel tanks tumbled toward Dutch farmland. The P-47s were now at combat weight. Altitude, 30,000 feet. Speed, 280 miles per hour. Internal fuel sufficient for 4 hours of flight time. German radar tracked the formation. Luftwaffe controllers scrambled every available fighter. Jagdgeschwader 3, Jagdgeschwader 11, Jagdgeschwader 26. 190 German fighters rose to intercept the bomber stream. The 56th Fighter Group positioned ahead of the bombers as planned. Zemke spotted the German formations assembling at 28,000 feet, 50 miles ahead. The P-47s dove, same tactics that worked in October: high-speed attack, single pass, zoom climb recovery. But something was different this mission. The Luftwaffe had adapted. German fighters no longer concentrated in single formations. They spread out in small groups, 4 aircraft sections, difficult to spot, difficult to intercept all simultaneously. When the P-47s dove on one section, 2 more sections attacked from different angles. The combat spread across 40 miles of German airspace. Zemke's group couldn't maintain formation cohesion while engaging multiple small German units. The fight fragmented into dozens of individual engagements. P-47 pilots found themselves alone, outnumbered, fighting multiple opponents simultaneously. Lieutenant Robert Johnson engaged 3 Messerschmitt 109s over Brunswick. He destroyed one, damaged another. The third got on his tail. Johnson dove to escape. The Messerschmitt followed. Both aircraft accelerated past 450 miles per hour. Johnson pulled out at 8,000 feet. The German pilot blacked out from G-forces and crashed. Across the battle space, similar fights repeated. German pilots tried to turn with the P-47s. Physics killed them. American pilots tried to climb away. Mathematics saved them. The Thunderbolt's power-to-weight ratio at combat speed exceeded anything the Luftwaffe could match. The bomber stream reached Leipzig at 12:30 hours. German flak batteries opened fire. 88mm guns, 105mm guns. The sky filled with black bursts. 21 B-17s went down over the target. Flak, not fighters. The Luftwaffe never got through. The 56th Fighter Group escorted the bombers back to England. They landed at Halesworth at 15:40 hours. 6 hours and 40 minutes total mission time. 18 German fighters confirmed destroyed. 2 P-47s lost. Both pilots survived and evaded capture. Big Week continued for 5 more days. Brunswick, Regensburg, Augsburg, Gotha, Schweinfurt again. And on March 6, 1944, the mission everyone said was impossible, Berlin. March 6, 1944, 0700 hours, RAF Halesworth. Zemke briefed his pilots for the deepest penetration mission ever attempted by American fighters, Berlin, 510 miles from the English coast. The German capital had never been reached by escort fighters. Every previous Berlin raid lost bombers by the dozen to unopposed Luftwaffe attacks. The mission plan was ambitious. 660 B-17s would hit industrial targets across Berlin. 397 fortresses targeted the VKF ball bearing plant in Erkner. 263 hit the Daimler-Benz engine factory. The raids would cripple German tank and aircraft production, if the bombers survived. 8th Air Force assigned 8 fighter groups to escort duty. Total, 673 fighters. 140 fighters rose to defend Berlin. The capital had never fallen to daylight bombing. It wouldn't fall today. 56th Fighter Group crossed into Berlin airspace at 11:22 hours. First American fighters over the city. Zemke spotted the German formations at 11:24. 70-plus contacts, 28,000 feet, 5 miles ahead of the bomber stream. Focke-Wulf 190s and Messerschmitt 109s mixed together. The Luftwaffe had committed everything. The P-47s dove from 33,000 feet. Zemke led the attack personally. His flight hit the German formation at 460 miles per hour. The initial pass destroyed 6 fighters in 11 seconds. The German formation scattered. Zemke's wingmen followed through. 3 more Focke-Wulfs went down. The sky above Berlin became a 3-dimensional battlefield. P-47s dove from altitude. German fighters tried to climb to the bombers. Both forces collided at 25,000 feet. 50 caliber tracers and 20mm cannon fire crisscrossed the airspace. Aircraft debris fell toward the city below. Zemke destroyed a Focke-Wulf over the Dummer Lake area, his second kill that day. His wingman got a Messerschmitt 109. The combat moved west as German fighters tried to regroup. The P-47s stayed with them. Diving attacks, zoom climbs, no turning engagements. The tactics that worked in October worked over Berlin. The bomber stream reached the target at 11:50 hours. Berlin's flak defenses opened fire. 2,000 anti-aircraft guns. The sky turned black with explosions. 69 B-17s took damage. 11 went down. But not one bomber fell to German fighters during the bomb run. The escorts held the Luftwaffe away from the formations. By 12:30 hours, the combat was over. The bombers turned west. German fighters broke off. Fuel exhaustion forced both sides to disengage. The 56th Fighter Group formed up and headed home. They landed at Halesworth at 14:40 hours. Total mission time? 6 hours and 10 minutes. Longest fighter mission flown by any American group to that date. Intelligence officers counted the results. 18 German fighters confirmed destroyed over Berlin. 4 probables. 9 damaged. 2 P-47s lost. 1 pilot recovered. 1 captured. But the numbers only told part of the story. American fighters had reached Berlin. They had protected the bombers. They had won the air battle over the German capital. The mission every expert said was impossible had succeeded. Zemke received the Distinguished Service Cross for leading the Berlin escort. The citation mentioned his tactical innovations, his leadership under fire, his role in turning the P-47 from a liability into the 8th Air Force's most successful fighter. 3 months later, the 56th Fighter Group would achieve something even more remarkable. May 1944. Allied forces prepared for Operation Overlord, the Normandy invasion. D-Day required absolute air superiority over the landing beaches. Luftwaffe fighters could not reach the invasion fleet, could not strafe the beaches, could not interfere with airborne operations. That mission fell to the fighter groups of 8th Air Force. The 56th Fighter Group moved to Boxted Airfield in Essex, closer to the French coast, better positioned for round-trip missions to Normandy. Their assignment was clear. Sweep ahead of the bombers, destroy German fighters before they reached the invasion zones, maintain constant patrols over the channel. May 8th through June 5th, The group flew 32 missions in 29 days: fighter sweeps, bomber escorts, armed reconnaissance, ground attack. The tempo exceeded anything from 1943. Pilots flew 6 days per week, sometimes twice per day. Everyone was exhausted. Everyone kept flying. June 6th, D-Day. The 56th launched at 0430 hours. First wave, 51 P-47s swept the French coast ahead of the invasion fleet. Their mission? Destroy any German aircraft attempting to reach the beaches. Not one Luftwaffe fighter would get through. The sky over Normandy at dawn was empty of German aircraft. The Luftwaffe had pulled back from coastal airfields days earlier. Allied intelligence knew they were positioning for counterattacks once the invasion began. The 56th flew toward those inland airfields. If German fighters wouldn't come to them, they would go to the Germans. At 0620 hours, Zemke spotted aircraft taking off from an airfield near Ivry. Focke-Wulf 190 scrambling to meet the invasion. The P-47s attacked the airfield during the takeoff sequence. German fighters were most vulnerable while accelerating down the runway. Heavy, slow, unable to maneuver. The attack destroyed 9 Focke-Wulfs on the ground. 4 more were shot down during takeoff. The remaining German fighters aborted their mission and scattered. Not one reached the invasion beaches. The 56th returned to Boxted at 0915 hours, refueled, rearmed, launched again at 1100 hours. Second mission of D-Day. Armed reconnaissance over the Falaise area. The group intercepted German fighter bombers attempting to reach Allied positions. Junkers 88s, Focke-Wulf 190 fighter bombers, Messerschmitt 110 night fighters pressed into daylight service. The Luftwaffe was throwing everything available into stopping the invasion. By sunset on June 6th, the 56th Fighter Group had flown 97 individual sorties. They claimed 23 German aircraft destroyed, 15 on the ground, 8 in the air, 0 American losses. The invasion succeeded partly because German fighters never reached the beaches in significant numbers. But June 6th was one day. The campaign continued through June, July, and August. The 56th flew constant missions supporting the breakout from Normandy. They strafed German convoys, destroyed fuel depots, attacked rail yards. The P-47's 850 caliber machine guns proved devastating against ground targets. Armor-piercing incendiary ammunition penetrated truck engines, fuel tanks, and locomotives. August 12, 1944. Zemke received orders to transfer to the 479th Fighter Group, a struggling unit equipped with P-38 Lightnings converting to P-51 Mustangs. 8th Air Force needed Zemke to rebuild them. His time with the 56th was over. Lieutenant Colonel David Schilling assumed command. Schilling had flown with the group since January 1943. He understood Zemke's tactics completely. The transition was seamless. The group's performance never declined. Under Schilling, the 56th continued operations through the end of 1944 and into 1945. Battle of the Bulge, crossing the Rhine, the final push into Germany. The group flew its last combat mission on April 21, 1945, 18 days before Germany surrendered. When the Air Force Historical Research Agency compiled final statistics, the 56th Fighter Group's record was undeniable. 2 years of combat operations, 447 missions flown, 19,391 sorties, 64,302 hours of combat flight time, 677.5 German aircraft destroyed in air-to-air combat, the highest aerial victory total of any fighter group in 8th Air Force, 100 more victories than the second-place group. The only fighter group in the European theater that flew the same aircraft type from first mission to last mission. The P-47 Thunderbolt that German pilots called too heavy for combat had destroyed more Luftwaffe fighters than any other American aircraft, not because the airframe changed, because the tactics changed. Zemke's diving attacks, his altitude discipline, his refusal to dogfight, his mathematical approach to aerial combat. These innovations transformed the strategic bombing campaign. They made D-Day possible. They won the air war over Europe. And it all started with one realization. The P-47 couldn't turn. So stop trying to make it turn. Zemke transferred to the 479th Fighter Group on August 12, 1944. His new unit flew P-51 Mustangs. Different aircraft, same tactics. Height advantage, diving attacks. Speed over maneuverability. He scored 2 1/2 additional victories with the 479th. His total reached 17 3/4 confirmed kills. October 30th, 1944. Zemke led a mission over Germany in deteriorating weather. Severe turbulence. His P-51's wings separated at 18,000 feet. He bailed out, evaded for 3 days. German troops captured him on November 2nd. He spent the remainder of the war in Stalag Luft 1 as senior Allied officer, responsible for 9,000 prisoners. But the 56th Fighter Group didn't need Zemke anymore. His tactics had become doctrine. Every pilot in the group understood the mathematics. Every new replacement learned the system. The unit's success continued under Schilling's command through the final 7 months of the war. The group produced 39 fighter aces, more than any other 8th Air Force fighter group. Lieutenant Colonel Francis Gabreski scored 28 victories with the 56th, the highest total of any American pilot in the European theater. Captain Robert Johnson finished with 27. Colonel David Schilling claimed 22 1/2. Major Walker Mahurin got 20 3/4. These weren't lucky pilots. They were disciplined tacticians who understood physics. They knew their aircraft's capabilities. They refused to fight the enemy's fight. They made the Luftwaffe fight their fight, and the Luftwaffe lost. By April 1945, other P-47 groups across 8th Air Force had adopted variations of Zemke's tactics. The 78th Fighter Group, the 352nd, the 353rd. Combined, P-47 Thunderbolt groups destroyed over 2,000 German aircraft in air-to-air combat. The supposedly obsolete fighter became the most successful American aircraft in the European theater. The strategic bombing campaign succeeded because fighters like the P-47 made it succeed. Bomber losses declined from 20% per mission in 1943 to less than 2% by 1945. German industrial production collapsed. Ball bearing factories, aircraft plants, oil refineries, tank factories, all destroyed by bombers protected by escorts that finally worked. Zemke survived the war, returned to the United States in May 1945, remained in the Air Force until 1966, retired as a full colonel. He never received a general's star, despite leading one of the most successful fighter groups in American history. Some said his outspoken criticism of senior officers cost him promotion. Others said the Air Force preferred leaders who didn't question doctrine. But Zemke changed warfare, regardless of his rank. His mathematical approach to aerial combat influenced fighter tactics for the next 30 years. Vietnam-era F-4 Phantom pilots used energy management tactics derived directly from Zemke's P-47 doctrine. Height advantage, speed advantage, boom and zoom. The principles remained valid even as aircraft speeds doubled and tripled. The 56th Fighter Group disbanded in October 1945, reformed in 1946, served through the Cold War, flew F-86 Sabres in air defense missions, converted to F-100 Super Sabres, then F-4 Phantoms. Today, the unit trains F-16 pilots at Luke Air Force Base in Arizona. The Wolfpack continues. If this story moved you the way it moved us, do me a favor, hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We're rescuing forgotten stories from dusty archives every single day. Stories about pilots and commanders who saved lives with tactics, mathematics, and discipline. Real people, real heroism. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you're watching from. Are you watching from the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia? Our community stretches across the entire world. You're not just a viewer, you're part of keeping these memories alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family served. Just let us know you're here. Thank you for watching. And thank you for making sure Hub Zemke and the 56th Fighter Group don't disappear into silence. These men deserve to be remembered, and you're helping make that happen.